So the full trailer for The Flash was released last night, and we got a good look at all the characters crossing paths in a multiverse film that signals the end of the current DCEU. We get a return from Michael Keaton's Batman, a taste of Ben Affleck's version of the character, a familiar yet also unfamiliar Man of Steel setting, multiple flashes, and the introduction of Sasha Calle's Supergirl. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down the trailer, explaining every character appearance, the altered DC timeline, and presenting my thoughts on all of this new footage. If you haven't seen the trailer yet, there will be a link in the description to it. Before I get into it though, if you want to keep up to date on any of my upcoming content surrounding The Flash, the new DCEU, and Matt Reeves' The Batman universe, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating, subscribing to the channel, and turning on your notifications. But without further ado, let's dive into the new trailer for The Flash. So the first official trailer for The Flash dropped last night, and it features Ezra Miller's Barry Allen going back in time and facing the consequences of those actions. There's been a lot of controversy surrounding this film, not just with the main actor, but also with the many directors and writers who have left the project before finally landing Andy Muschietti and writer Christina Hodson. And based on all of this new footage, it's definitely a trailer that surprised me, not just in all of the DC Multiverse introductions, but also in its promise of a streamlined story that packs an emotional punch. Not only does this Flash film take from the famous Flashpoint story surrounding Barry Allen, but it also looks to be acting as a final film in the current DCEU and a somewhat starting point for the new DCU by James Gunn and Peter Safran. James Gunn has quoted recently that the Flash movie is incredible, so regardless of it being a potential ending for the current DCEU, I guess it would be great to go out with a bang. And whether you're intrigued as a comic book fan or not, there's no denying that there's a lot happening here, whether it be multiple Batmen on the scene, multiple Flashes, a new Supergirl, and a Man of Steel related timeline. So let's break down all of the biggest talking points from the trailer and discuss every involvement in this huge DC event. So the trailer opens with Barry Allen reminiscing and revisiting his tragic childhood in this universe, with what seems to be Ben Affleck's Batman telling him in a voiceover, "You can go anywhere, so why do you want to stay and fight for this one?" And Barry replies, "Because this is the one where my mum lives." He also fills us in on the impact of time by saying that different worlds and moments are drawn to each other like magnets, and that time has a pattern that it can't help reliving. So, as was reported about the plot of this film, The Flash is taking its central beats from the Flashpoint storyline, where Ezra Miller's Barry Allen will travel back in time and change the history of the DC universe, but more importantly, he will aim to prevent the death of his mother, which also left his father in prison for her murder. In that iconic storyline, he attempts to travel back through time and save his mother from being horribly murdered by another version of himself, known as the Reverse Flash. But even after seeing this footage, it's still a mystery surrounding which Flash will fill the villain role, because alongside getting a look at our Flash, we get the alternate version of Barry and a reference to another Flash in the final battle as well. The two versions of Barry Allen we see the most seem to get along, but if we think about the story that this is based on, their friendship may not last that long. We see a shot in the trailer where lightning cuts through their bodies, and it's known that Barry's multiversal journey is the event that gives him his powers. In the Flash film, I wouldn't be surprised that if once Barry travels back in time, this is the event that gives the alternate Flash his own abilities and strips our Barry of the abilities he has. On top of that, I think they're going to follow the story point that defines this movie, in that while trying to save his mother, the trip he takes essentially is the reason she dies. And once alternate Flash finds this out, it could give him the motivation to fight Barry and maybe even become the villainous Reverse Flash. The death of Barry's mother is looking to be the big driving point of this story, and it's clearly a big reason for both versions of Barry to join up in the first place. But on top of this, we do also see what looks to be a part of the fight between our Barry and Dark Flash later on in the film, and this version of the Flash is tied to the Speed Force, representing the death of all Barry Allens. Like the issues created by Barry's journey back to the past, Dark Flash could also be the result of those actions too. He is a somewhat mutated Flash, and based on recent rumours, it looks like he's going to be wearing a black suit made of Kryptonian material. So with all of this chaos going down with numerous Flashes involved, the main Barry will have to try to gain some help in the multiversal world that he helped forge, and this includes the introduction of some known figures from past DC films. And if this is accurate to the Flashpoint story, Barry will have to try and reclaim his powers because, like I said before, in the Inspired story, he loses them when he wakes up in the new reality. Maybe that's what the lightning scene in the trailer actually is, in that he and the alternate Barry will try to replicate the original Speed Force accident, and in the process, he'll get his powers back. When it comes to the title character in this trailer, visually we do further see shots of a red and blue Flash coming together, which could be the two main Barrys, and then there's also another great visual cue of Barry's signature Flash ring, which, like in the comics, he hides his costume inside of. So now that we've discussed the basic plotline and the different Flashes that are potentially involved, what else did we see surrounding the other characters that are in this movie? Well, we get a bit of Ben Affleck's Batman, who tells Barry that if he were to go into the past, he would have no idea of the consequences that would come his way. And of course, from what I talked about before, we know that those words do reign true. We do see a couple of other shots of Affleck's Batman in action as well, giving us a good idea that this Batman will be featured heavily in the first act before Barry rewrites the timeline and goes back to 2013. Affleck's Batman appears to have a new bat cycle, a new tactical suit that has the iconic blue and grey colour scheme, and he appears to be working in and out of the Flying Fox, which we saw in many other DCEU films with Affleck's Batman. When the main Flash does rewrite history though, he goes back to the Man of Steel era of events in 2013, and things seem to have changed quite a bit. There's no metahumans, General Zod has an advantage in turning Earth into Krypton, and there's no Superman, but rather a detained Supergirl. But what we learn is that alongside that, there is a reintroduced version of Michael Keaton's Batman. From what we know, Barry has accidentally brought Tim Burton's Batman world into contact with the Man of Steel one that he's gone back to. We know that there are no metahumans in that Burton world, and it would only make sense that Keaton's version of the character is the one to become the somewhat father figure in this movie. We get shots of a Wayne Manor in ruins, Keaton's Batcave, and the famous hero in his iconic suit beating up thugs who try to break in. And when he does first pop up, he puts his own spin on the iconic "I'm Batman" line, and there's also the nostalgic use of Danny Elfman's Batman theme that really does take us back to that iconic Burton world. I guess we're going to have to wait and see what his extended role in this movie really involves, but from everything we do see, Keaton's Batman will act as a mentor to Barry, guiding him through this new timeline and helping him fight against threats such as Michael Shannon's General Zod from Man of Steel and the security guards that hold Supergirl in prison. So that brings us to the big Man of Steel related timeline and what that means for all the returning and new characters in The Flash. The 2013 timeline that Barry returns to features the return of General Zod, who, coupled with a Kryptonian army, begins an invasion of Earth that on one side seems quite similar to what we've seen before. But while Zod and his army are returning to the DCEU, the issues that Barry created with the timeline means that now there isn't a Superman to defend the planet. So this version of Earth that is a result of a rippled reality, both forwards and backwards in time, has to settle for two Barrys and an old Batman to save the day. There's no metahumans like Superman, Wonder Woman, or Aquaman. But things surrounding that matter will change because, as seen in the trailer, there is one metahuman stuck in prison, and that is none other than Supergirl. Kara Zor-El has the strength and superflight of Superman and her own red and blue suit that has the same S symbol as her cousin. She even breaks the sonic barrier as a great homage to the Man of Steel flight sequence. So what we learn by this replacement of Superman is that essentially in the new reality, it was Kara Zor-El, not Kal-El, who crash-landed on Earth, and instead of having human parents look after her, Supergirl is in government custody. As said before, Keaton's Batman and Barry's Flash attempt to break her out, and once they do, she's definitely a more violent version of the character we know, and that's because of that change in origin. She didn't have the childhood on Earth that Clark did, and now the others are going to have to convince her to help save a planet that kept her in custody. So overall, it seems like The Flash is going to have quite the insane plot events, and maybe even things we don't expect, all coming together for the DCEU's big multiversal ending. One that will reset everything and lead us into the new DCU in 2025 with Superman Legacy. It looks like we're going to be getting multiple Batmen, multiple Flashes, a Supergirl, and some famous faces from Man of Steel, all wrapped up in an epic superhero blockbuster event. There's also been some recent rumours about Christian Bale's Batman potentially being in this film, and as I said on my community feed the other day, I personally would not like to see that. He's my favourite Batman, and I just think that his story was wrapped up in a nice bow across the Dark Knight trilogy. The tone of that Batman also doesn't really fit in this film, whereas with the Keaton one, you can definitely see that working a lot better. Bale's Batman is not the type to be crossing over into comic book universe films, and I think the same can be said about Robert Pattinson's Batman too. At the end of the day, it's just rumours, and like I said, I personally think they are completely fake, because even the leaked plot for this movie didn't mention anything about these appearances. We'll have to see, but I think when it comes to the comic book universe movie, it's better to involve elements that would fit with the tone and filmmaking style. But that was my video on the new trailer for The Flash. As a whole, it did get me excited for a film that I wasn't really looking forward to in the time before. It was great to see appearances from Michael Keaton's Batman, Ben Affleck's Dark Knight, and the new Supergirl, all brought together in this reminiscent Man of Steel timeline. It feels like it's going to be a love letter to DC fans, and to those like myself who do like Man of Steel and elements of the DCEU. I really appreciated the big focus on the plot surrounding Barry Allen too, because it seems as if there's going to be emotional stakes that stem from the core of his backstory, just like in the Flashpoint story that this movie is based on. It looks like it's going to be DC's No Way Home in that regard, and I really hope they can just pull off a well-made film too that is benefited by the fact that this seems to be a one-off ending to the current DC universe. That being said though, if I put the DC fan part of me aside, there were some points in this trailer that made me quite conflicted over the film in general. The visual effects at times look really unpolished, and especially during moments of the Man of Steel footage. I really loved Man of Steel, and the moments surrounding that timeline in this trailer did stand out as being quite shabby in comparison to the visuals in that film, which includes similar moments. I'm also left in a conflicted state over whether this can be a great one-off film, or one that if delivered poorly will have me looking back and asking what was the point. We know the DCU is starting over soon after The Flash, and I feel quite similar towards all the universe movies that are coming out before that restart. But again, this may work in DC's favour, because like I said in my DC video essay the other day, all I want is individually good films from the studio, whether they are connected or separated from the main universe. The Flash promises a nostalgic flavour that's popular in the comic book medium right now, and while that isn't my favourite type of comic book film, I can't deny that the return of some of these great characters did get me excited. We'll have to see, and I'm hopeful that the filmmaking and VFX on display can improve in the months leading up to the film's release. Let's just say I'm cautiously optimistic when it comes to the filmmaking side of things, but I'm very excited when it comes to the nostalgic DC side of things too. But let me know down below in the comment section what your thoughts are towards the new Flash trailer, alongside your predictions on what we could see unfold in this massive crossover event. For much more videos and news on The Flash and DC, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.